Scan Pro Video brings you a series of webinars focusing on the latest Blackmagic design products and information.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and join us on this webinar. So today we're going to be looking at working remotely with DaVinci Resolve with none other than Simon Hall from Blackmagic Design. Simon's incredibly knowledgeable about everything DaVinci Resolve and most things Blackmagic. So feel free to send questions his way. We ask a little bit of housekeeping. We ask that you all remain muted for the duration of the call. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat window and I'll raise them with Simon Hall at the end, and we'll have a bit of a Q&A that way. I'll also be monitoring the chat, so I'll try and help out where I can as Si's presenting. If not, just raise your hand or send me a message, and I'll quite happily jump on everything. I think that's everything from our side. So I will hand over to you, Simon.
Cheers, Al. Good afternoon. I hope you're all well. As Alistair said, my name's Simon. I'm the Senior Technical Sales Specialist here at Blackmagic Design for post-production. So I spend a lot of time sort of working with Resolve and our capture and playback devices. And yeah, today what I'm going to do is sort of take you through sort of working remotely with Resolve. Now, this is not a webinar of kind of complex networking, because what we wanted to do is we want to put something out there whereby, obviously our pandemic unbelievably is still ongoing. So we get a lot of people obviously kind of working from home, asking questions about working from home, and people to share things like media and projects are not going to have FTP sites they can upload via a VPN and have a Resolve database sat in the cloud. There are people working like that, and it is possible to work like that. You could put a Resolve database in a cloud-based solution. We have now people working on virtual machines using things like Amazon Workspace. So those things are possible, but it would probably take me a day to kind of go through those processes and how you set them up. So what I wanted to do is put together a kind of webinar is like, if you are working remotely, if you've got to invest in a machine, if you need to share media with people, if you need to share edits with people, if you need to work around the fact that you don't have a desktop machine, you've got to use a laptop. What are some of the things in Resolve that you can do to kind of work around the fact that you might have to run sort of 8K material on your laptop? And this is happening a lot. I have a lot of people, speaking to me going, I've got loads of red 8K stuff. Got Blackmagic Raw at 12K, but I'm editing on a 4-year-old MacBook Pro. And so there are certain techniques you can use to get around some of the issues that you may have in a workflow if you're using a lower powered machine. And also, as I said, is looking at how you can, if you're editing and you want to send an edit to somebody else, you can do that. If you want to do, if you grade a project and then somebody else sends you another version of the edit, how can you trace the grades over? So what I'm going to do is, as I said, I'm just going to start just by sharing my screen. I will just hide you guys for a second. And what I'm actually going to do is just jump into Keynote. Now, admittedly, I only have a few slides for this, but it just covers a lot of the common questions I get asked from a hardware setup point of view. So people always say, well, what machine do I need to run Resolve? Now, it depends on what you're doing. But also, one of the important things to consider is how Resolve actually uses its resources. So admittedly, arguably one of the most important things in Resolve is the GPU, because we do a lot of the processing through the GPU. But people say, well, what CPU do I need? What GPU? How much RAM? So it depends on what you're doing. So for example, the CPU in Resolve, it does a lot of the compressed encoding and decoding. So for example, if you have a lot of H.264 files, that you have shot. You shot, you've got one of your cameras on a shoot that's an iPhone. So you've got a huge amount of H.264 or H.265 content. Now, that decoding, so when you drop that into Resolve, because it's a compressed format, not every frame is a full frame, the CPU has to process that information. So again, yeah, looking at your workflow, if you spend a lot of your time working with compressed media formats, having a reasonably sized CPU then becomes important. It's also things like raw deburring. So some raw formats, so for example, Cinema DNG that our cameras used to shoot. Now, admittedly, we've dropped it in favor of Blackmagic RAW, and this is one of the reasons why we dropped Cinema DNG. But I know, there are cameras out there that shoot Cinema DNG. There's drone cameras that shoot Cinema DNG. And again, because that's just an image sequence, it has to be processed by the CPU. And there's some, for those of you a little bit more advanced, for those of you going into Fusion, there is an option in Fusion where you could choose the CPU or the GPU to process certain elements. And then on top of that, you've got your computer processors, like running the software. So, again, if you're using a lot of compressed formats, having a reasonably sized CPU is a good thing. As I was saying, the GPU is quite important in Resolve because we do a lot of the processes through the GPU. So things like, your grades, your effects, your noise reduction, that is all processed by the GPU. Also, things like non-GOT rendering, so your uncompressed, well, I say uncompressed, but your full frame format. So for example, if you render DNxHR or ProRes out of Resolve, because it's a full frame format, it will basically accelerate that through the GPU. Now, admittedly, in Resolve 17, there is something. So new NVIDIA graphics cards have the ability to accelerate H.264 and H.265 encoding through the graphics card, but it's only NVIDIA graphics cards and it's only certain ones. But the other thing with GPU as well, and I said, this is kind of why our cameras moved away from Cinema DNG and we created our own Blackmagic RAW, because Blackmagic RAW, because it sort of does a partial demosaic in the camera, you get one file. And basically in Resolve, it allows that one file, even though it's a raw file, it allows it to be processed by the GPU. The same goes with Red Raw. So because Red Raw does a similar thing where it does a partial demosaic in camera, so you end up with one file rather than just an image sequence. So Red Raw is processed through the GPU. And also as well, with your GPU displays, having, running your display, if you've got, like Scans 3XS machines, if you've got you want to run two displays, you've got to run them off the graphics card. But yeah, GPU in Resolve it becomes an important thing. And also the RAM. Resolve doesn't require huge amounts of RAM unless you're going into Fusion, because Fusion visual effects guys always cache in the RAM because they don't want to kind of write files all the time because they change and tweak things a lot. So, if you're using Fusion, you need a serious amount of RAM. I would say a minimum 64 gig. And then one of the final things to consider is the storage. And the storage is a weird thing because, a lot of people do actually go and sort of say, well, I've got all this content, and they just kind of buy, £100 USB 3 drive and bung all their content on. And then because if you've got huge files reading off that drive, obviously there could be a bottleneck in the USB connection. If it's a spinning disk drive, it may not be able to read the files fast enough. And then in Resolve, what happens is you kind of start to drop frames. I mean, the good thing is now things like solid state drives are getting really good. You can get a really good, like, again, the guys at Scan will be able to help with this. You could get a really good sort of Thunderbolt 3 SSD, a terabyte for like £100, and they're sort of super fast. So again, these are the things to consider. If you're setting up a Resolve system and you've been working at home for a while and you're kind of going, well, I could look at replacing my machine. These are some of the things to consider as to how Resolve uses its resources. So the minimum system requirements, everybody goes, well, what's the minimum spec I need? And this is what something that we recommend. So you need a 64-bit operating system, which most machines are now. You know, you can be Mac, Windows, Linux. With Linux, we always say is you need CentOS. Yes, there are lots and lots of different versions of Linux, and Resolve will run on something like Ubuntu. But it's not something we recommend because there's so many different versions of Linux. We unfortunately can't commit to testing Resolve on every single iteration of Linux. It'd just take too long. So we actually say, well, you know, if you want to use it on Linux, this is the one we recommend. There's a BIOS with the Resolve installer for Linux, but yeah, we recommend CentOS 7.3. But, you know, let's face it, other operating systems, you basically Mac OS, Windows 10, sorted. Minimum 8 gig of RAM. I'd recommend 16. Again, if you look at buying new machines now, most of them come with 16 now. Sort of, you know, when I was researching this, it's very, you know, you can get quite underpowered laptops, but most of the time now, even, you know, pretty standard laptops come with 16 gig of RAM. You need an NVIDIA, AMD, or Intel GPU. We also work, Resolve now works, for those of you who are interested, the new ARM chips, so the new Apple M1 chips. So for the new Mac Mini and the iMac that's coming, Resolve works with those as well. And I can say I've got my own little Mac Mini that's an M1 chip, and it's good. It's fine for editing. I wouldn't kind of push it out towards like big grading, but to kind of edit something together, it's absolutely fine. And as you say, the minimum size of the graphics card is 2 gigabytes of VRAM. Again, if you're looking at buying a machine now, graphics cards get bigger in size now. You know, I remember like 3 or 4 years ago, an 8 gig graphics card would be quite expensive, whereas now, you know, they're relatively cheap. But again, if you think with Resolve, how it processes, you know, how it processes the images in it, a lot of it is done for the GPU. So if you're going to invest your money in something, for me, the GPU is kind of the key thing. The GPU must support versions greater than OpenCL 1.2 or CUDA 3. Obviously, if you're on Mac, we support Metal. But again, if you need a GPU that supports either OpenCL 1.2 or later, or CUDA 3 or later. Again, you can't sort of put in really, really old NVIDIA graphics cards because, again, they're just not optimized to sort of process images in Resolve. And then said like a modern quad-core CPU or higher. So there would be the minimum specs that I would recommend. And just something about the GPUs, you know, one of the important things to remember about the GPUs. DaVinci Resolve, the free version, uses 1 GPU for processing. The studio version can use up to 8, depending on the OS. Now, as you say, so the free version of Resolve only uses 1 graphics card for processing. And again, I've seen this a lot on forums. I'm members of Facebook groups and chat rooms and everything else. And there's a lot of people going, oh, I've got the free version of Resolve. If I buy Studio, will the performance of my machine become quicker? And the answer is no, it won't. If you have 1 graphics card, no, it won't. The performance of your machine won't massively leap forwards. Also, as well, with the free version of Resolve, if you have a graphics card for your display and then a graphics card for processing, even with the free version of Resolve, you can use that because you're still only using 1 GPU for processing. So again, you know, there's no difference. If you're going to go into buying multiple GPUs, so say you've got 1 graphics card and then you want to buy another one to kind of accelerate your workflow, that's when you need the studio version because it needs to see the 2 graphics cards. So the studio version you can use, it's in Linux, you can use up to 8, but these days 8 is overkill. And, you know, when speccing a system, again, people often ask, is it better to get 1 big graphics card or 2 smaller ones? In truth, it's better to get 1 bigger one. Speaking from experience, I have, funnily enough, one of Scan's 3XS machines with a new NVIDIA 3090 graphics card in, and that absolutely flies. It absolutely flies along. One of the reasons why I always say to people is, look, if you're spending the money, get one GPU. It's because some processors only use one GPU. So for example, noise reduction in Resolve, because we use a temporal algorithm that looks at frames sort of backwards and forwards. So again, what the noise reduction does, it looks at information in an image and it takes pixels that don't have noise on and applies it to pixels that do have noise on. And that's why on noise reduction, you can do noise reduction without softening the image too much. But that process, because it's a temporal algorithm, it can only be done over one graphics card. Now, admittedly, if you need like lots of horsepower for rendering, getting two graphics cards is good, because when you render something like ProRes or even an image sequence, it will go frame on render on graphics card 1, render frame 2 on graphics card 2. So it'll just swap between the graphics cards rendering the frames. And then obviously that will massively speed up your render process. So as I said, that's one thing to bear in mind is if people would say, 2 smaller ones or 1 bigger one, I would always guide you towards 1 bigger one. As I said, in an ideal world, it's beneficial to have 1 small GPU for your GUI. It doesn't have to be anything tremendous, just so it runs the GUI and then it frees up that 1 graphics card for processing. At the moment, said my 3XS machine that I've got at home with the 3090 it's only got the 3090 in, but I run an one Ultra HD display and it does all my processing and it never misses a beat. So it's that's good. Okay, so that's just a little bit about hardware, about sort of computer setup. I'll come back to additional hardware a little bit later on. Now, so yes, it's all very well and good. If you've got a huge amount of money to spend on a machine, then you can work with Resolve and you can work with 12K and 8K and 6K images. But the saying is, what happens if you've had to buy a machine for home, or you're looking at replacing a machine and you don't have tens of thousands of pounds to spend on a machine? What are the certain things you can do in Resolve that sort of work around these issues if you've got a lower powered machine? And again, people working remotely now, people out in the field now, we're still kind of partially in lockdown. People are, and again, this is for all walks of life. People are still working remotely on machines that are slightly underpowered. And I've had lots of conversations over the last year with people is to kind of certain things to try in Resolve to kind of ease the strain on your system. Now, one of the first things I always point people in the direction of is timeline resolution. Because, obviously there is, how do I put this? There's a healthy obsession with resolution. And, people always want to make sure that if you shoot in 6K, you're looking at 6K images. But my first question to people is, why do you need to look at 6K images? The image that the display that you're watching it on is not 6K. If you have a Blackmagic capture and playback device, which I will look at a little bit later on, if you have one of those, you're going to have an external monitor, because we always advise, especially when you're grading, is to have an external monitor of some sort. So you've got a proper clean video feed. But again, that monitor that you're watching it on is not going to be 6K. And this is what we've been having with 12K. We've had a lot of people kind of contacting us going, what's the best workflow for 12K? I've set my project up for 12K. And my thought process is, well, are you going to watch it in 12K? There's no such thing as a 12K display. Most of the time, even if you've got an external monitor, you're going to work in HD or Ultra HD, or going up to 4K. But it's very rare that people have 8K preview displays. So this is the whole thing in Resolve, is you actually don't need to work at a massive resolution for even when you're editing and you're grading. So you can see is, you take a look. This is, I'm on an iMac here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this back. Now you can see these clips, they've all got some fancy grades on. Again, so I'll just go into the color page, I'll show you. So as you can see, they've got a load of grades on, and I've got lots. Let me turn off my loop playback, that'd help. So as you can see, I'm playing this back And already my machine's having a little good. Sorry guys, I'm just going to check my timeline resolution here. Okay, yes, okay. Ah, it's got some sharpen on it. Okay, that's not a problem. No idea what that is. So obviously I wanted the machine to work absolutely perfectly, and now it's kicking up a fuss, obviously, because I am doing a demo. But okay, so this is possibly a prime example. So at the moment, I am actually previewing my content in 720p. I have a timeline set up in 720p. Now these files in Resolve are from our Pocket 4K. I think they're the Pocket 4K. Again, let me just go into the metadata. So as you can see, these files are from the Pocket 4K camera, but I'm actually dropping them into a 720p timeline. Because unlike other systems, Resolve is resolution independent. So at 720p, you can see that, I know this is heavy, you know, they've got some heavy grades, but at the moment I'm looking at, let me actually go into the edit. Let me go into the edit. So, you know, without any grades on, this is raw 4K material playing back on a pretty standard iMac. There's nothing special about this iMac. It's about 5 years old. It has a, I mean, I'll show you. It has a relatively, you can see, it's an i7 processor. I've got 32 gig of RAM. It's a 4 gig graphics card. It's a pretty standard machine. But as you can see, I'm playing this timeline back, and these are 4K raw files playing back in real time. And that's to do with my timeline resolution. And this is one of the great things I love about Resolve. It's sort of resolution independent. So what you can do is you can drop the timeline resolution and edit at 720p. Then when it comes to delivery, what you can do is you can go in and you can change the resolution to something like Ultra HD. And as you can see, now we're working in Ultra HD. And as you can see, I've got pretty smooth, I've still got pretty smooth playback. If I start to push this towards 8K, for example, oh, annoyingly, the machine's doing it, definitely not what I want to do. It's annoyingly playing back in real time. Okay, let me, I'm just going to drop this back to 720p. So what I'll do is I'll just jump on to some of the color graded clips. So that's kind of a fair one there. As you see, I've got real time, I've got real time playback on this clip. It's got several nodes of grading on, and I'm running at 720p. But if I change the resolution, oh, lovely. When I tested this on my Mac Pro at home, it was absolutely working absolutely fine. Let me just try this. I'm trying to get it to break. Okay, here we go. So what you can do in Resolve to ease the strain on your machine, you can work at a lower resolution. You can still preview at 4K, for example, because all you do in your video monitoring, when it comes to your image scaling, you just do the output scaling and you say match timeline settings, or you say customized and say, well, actually what I want to do is I want to do an Ultra HD preview on the output. Now, again, what a lot of people do is they worry about that because what they think is they've got their 4K material, you're dropping it into a 720p timeline, and then your output is being upscaled from 720p, and that's not the case. Resolve always looks at the original content. Because you're processing things at 720p, it eases the strain on your graphics card. So again, yeah, if I sort of take a look at this, I said I'm working at 720p at the moment. And it's still playing back relatively slowly. Oh, sorry. I think I know why. Sorry, guys. I know why this isn't why this is working really smoothly. This is something else I'm going to come to very, very shortly. Because I was actually looking at some optimized media that I'm going to come to very, very shortly. So basically at 720p, I've got real-time playback, but if I change the timeline resolution, oh, it's still working. But trust me, one of the workarounds you can do is if you find you've got 8K material, don't in Resolve make an 8K timeline. Drop it to 720p, work with it, and then change your timeline resolution, maybe for grading, but then certainly change your timeline resolution for export. And again, people always say, well, you know, what happens, you know, something like this, for example, this real light here. You know, what happens if you've worked in a 720p timeline and you've done some tracking? So as you can see, I've got a power window around this light. I've tracked the information. Now, surely, if we change the timeline resolution, it's going to affect the tracking. But the great thing in Resolve, it doesn't. So again, what I can do is I can change my timeline resolution to Ultra HD. And as you can now see, the tracking and the power window remain the same. So my first thing that I always say to people is, if you're struggling with playback on your machine, drop your timeline resolution. You don't have to work in 8K or 6K or 4K. Drop it to HD and you can work in HD. And then change your timeline resolution maybe for grading. So that's one of the workarounds if you're working on a lower powered machine. The one thing to do bear in mind is if you do, if you have, if you change the resolution and you've changed the scaling of your clips, then you will need to do some tweaking. So maybe you do your scaling when you change your timeline to your deliverable output. Now, the other sort of workaround that you can do is, again, you know, if I go into the completed grade in here, you know, I was having difficulty playing some of these shots back. You know, one of the things you can do, again, if you're struggling for playback, you can go into proxy mode. So under the playback menu, you've got something called timeline proxy mode. So what you can simply do is just say, just drop this to quarter resolution and then play it back. And as you can see, it's a little bit jittery, but actually the frame rate is higher. So again, at the moment I'm running, see what, let me, guys, I'll just move the zoom out of the way. Sure, I'm just going to show all frames in that to actually show you the playback. So as you can see with this is we're getting about 13.5 seconds in quarter playback mode. If I turn the playback mode off, I'm getting about 3 to 4. So again, that's another thing. If you want to quickly preview, then drop your playback proxy mode, and it will just make it quarter res. Now, again, the question that people then ask is to go, well, should I just use proxy playback mode all the time? And again, that depends. So if you've got a lot of content that say 8K, I mean, admittedly said, my content here is 4K. What you can actually do is you could create either optimized media or proxy files to work with. So optimized media files are great if you are going to stick to working in Resolve. If, for example, you might want to use another editing system and then drop files into Grade, or you might want to share media with somebody, creating proxy files external to Resolve may be a better way. So optimized media files are just files that you can use in Resolve, whereas proxy media is things like QuickTime files that you can use absolutely anywhere. So what optimized media does, it basically creates a low-res version that you can access. So again, you know, you can always right click and you've got an option that simply says generate optimized media. And if you generate optimized media, it will simply create a low res version. Now, if you're struggling to find your optimized media, so you keep dropping clips in and you can't quite, you can't quite sort of find, you've been throwing media in and you've been optimizing as you go, and you don't really know what's optimized and what isn't. One of the things that I like to do as well is to create a smart bin. So, what a smart bin is, is basically a search result. So, I could create a smart bin called optimized. And then in the media pool properties under file name, I could just scroll down, and if I can find it, I should have something for optimized media. Okay, have we moved this? Okay, guys, I'll let you into a little secret here. The optimized media has disappeared from this as well. I think it's come from an update in version 17.1.1. What you could do in the media pool is you did have the ability to add an optimized media file path. And I've just noticed in the smart bin, there's no option for optimized media either. So I think this is, in truth, this is just something we've actually forgotten. Let me just go into the smart bins again, and I'm just going to call this optimized. Yeah, my optimized. So basically what I should have in here is an optimized option. And I think in version 17.1.1, for some reason, it's disappeared. Yeah, so what you can actually do is you can create optimized media. So again, I said, I'm kind of having a looking into why these options have disappeared. But basically, it said what optimized media does is it simply generates media in your choosing. So again, I've used ProRes because I'm on a Mac. I've used 1/8 resolution. And simply I can toggle between using optimized media. So again, I can say use optimized media if available. And again, if I zoom into this, you can notice the difference between the two. So again, I'm looking at my optimized media here, which is heavily compressed. If I uncheck the used optimized media option, you can see the image sharpens up a lot. So basically what the optimized media is, it's just a way of you creating low res files to work with. So you can edit with those. And then simply what you do when you go into grading, you simply say, right, turn off the optimized media and let me look at my original raw files again. Because again, if you keep the optimized media turned on, you're actually going to start grading the optimized media files that you probably don't want to do. But you can also create proxy files as well. So I said optimized media files, they are simply lines of code. So they're not files you can do something with. So as you can see, people always say, well, where's the cache location? So again, under my, I think I've just got it set to my movies. Here you can see, here are some cached clips. And if I go into optimized media, this is what optimized media files look like. They're just lines of code. So they're not files that can be accessed by anything outside of Resolve. However, you can create proxy files. So for example, if you have a load of raw files and you import them into Resolve and you kind of, and then you might have an editor that you're working with that goes, can you just give me some low res files that I can edit with? What you can actually do in Resolve is, you could just go into the media manager and under the entire project, you could say, well, transcode all my clips into things like H.264. So as you can see, the current files that I'm using at the moment are 15.5 gig, but I'm actually going to end up with files less than a gig. And so, yeah, basically with proxy files, it simply creates low res QuickTime files that you can use. Now, the other thing as well that's really good with this is, what happens if you want to share files? What happens if you want to share files with people? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up another project here. So as you can see, this is a project. Now this has been created using this project. This edit has been created using low-res QuickTime files. So again, if I look at the metadata in here, you can see this is a .mov file. It's a 1280 by 720 ProRes proxy file. So I've been working with these proxies. So they were created in the Resolve, rendered out. But, you know, again, if you're working remotely and you're kind of working with an editor, well, how do you sort of get files across to your editor? Well, you know, there's lots of different systems you can use, but, you know, one of the ones that we recommend at Blackmagic is Frame.io, because Frame.io is actually integrated into Resolve. So if I go into the media page here, you can see I am signed in to a Frame.io account. You can do this in your preferences. So under your system preferences, under internet accounts, you can see I am signed in to a Frame.io account. So Frame.io, again, is a really kind of nice way of sharing files. And I will show you kind of why that is. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into my workspace window and I'm just going to open up my background activity. So when you sign into your Frame.io account, it appears like a hard drive in your media storage. So again, if I click onto my Frame.io account and I go into Resolve, I think it's under Resolve Support and our EMEA demo, I just go into my technical sales, Aston Martin, and I go into proxy. As you can see, here are two files that are sitting in my Frame.io account. So again, you know, if you're creating proxy files for an editor, you could create them all and then just upload them to the Frame.io account. Then at the other side, if they're dragging things down into Resolve, one of the cool things that I love about Frame.io is you can drag a file in and the file will immediately be available to you. It's this one here, but it's actually kind of well, it's done now. But basically what it does is it creates a really, really low res proxy. So you can preview it immediately while it's downloading in the background. So let me see if I can do this really quickly. Our internet here is quite quick. But watch what happens. If I drag a file from Frame.io, it appears in the downloads. And as you can see, I don't know if this comes across on Zoom really well, but as you can see, this is a really low res proxy. But then as soon as the file is downloaded, I'm looking at the full, the full resolution that was sent to me. So Frame.io, again, there are lots of other systems you can use, but this is one of the ones that integrates into Resolve. So if you're sending files to people, you can just upload them. They can drop them down into the other side, and they immediately get a proxy preview. So they can immediately be kind of scrubbing through and just doing a preview while it downloads in the background. And if you open up the background activity window, it shows you the progress of your frames downloading. So I suppose the next thing is then you're kind of going, well, people are going, well, okay, so say we create what we've done here is we've created an edit using this proxy media. You know, we've used this proxy media to create an edit. What we now want to do is go in and reattach the raw files. One of the easiest things to do is with the raw, if you've got a load of raw files, one of the easiest things to do is throw away all your original files, or sorry, all the proxy media files. And as you can see, I've done it all apart from the audio. I'll keep the audio in. And as you can see, everything is now offline in my project. But then what I can do is if I go back and I go and find my original files. So they are in this file here, media files. So here we go. Here are my original B-raw files. What I can do is I can just select all of those and drop them back into the project. And hey presto, they reconnect. Oh, I say that. There's always one stray one. Did I get them all? I'm pretty sure I did. 003. Ooh, am I missing? Oh, I'm missing a stray one. I'm missing a stray file. I don't know where that raw file's gone actually. Okay, It may be my it may be the QuickTime file. Not to worry, not to worry. I think it's having a little difficulty reconnecting. However, but you see is basically if you have proxy files that you know, you've just used QuickTime files, what you can then do is just throw all those proxy files away, drag all the raw files in, and it'll reconnect. Apart from this one that I appear to be missing. I think this is the QuickTime file. I'll tell you what, I can always just undo what I did. Oh yeah, it's there. It's actually there. So yes, that is, what I'm going to do is, it's my naming. Okay, the naming, as you can see, the importance of is getting the naming convention correct. So again, you know, what I could always do is I will delete all the proxy media that I don't need, delete all that, go and drop the raw files in, and it magically reconnects everything. The file at the end was my fault. I've got a naming convention wrong. But as you can see, is, you know, if you do get a naming convention wrong, it won't reconnect. So how that simply works is Resolve simply looks at the file name and the time code. And if they match, you can just throw all your media away, drag all the raw files in, and it'll just rebuild your timeline. The cool thing is as well, though, if you've still got the proxy files, don't throw them away. Because what you can also do is attach your raw files to proxy files. So again, what I could do is I could select all of these clips and I could right click and I could say link proxy media. And then what I could do is go back into my drive, if I can find this. Here are all my proxy files. And if I hit open, no, actually it's fine. So basically now what I've got is I do have a field for proxy media. So again, if I choose in my media pool to show the proxy media path, should be somewhere on here. Where are we? There we go. There we go. The proxy media path. You can see it's showing me the path to the proxy media. And then also what you can do is in Resolve, when you're working, if you want to look at the raw file, you can do, or under the playback option, I think I'm looking at the proxy at the moment. So you can look at the raw file, or under playback, you can say use proxy media if available. So this is one of the things, this was newly introduced in 17, this idea of having proxy media. And I really like it because you can sort of create proxy files, low-res QuickTimes, edit with them, throw them all away, drop your raw files into the grade, but then link back to the proxy files in case you kind of need to toggle quality between the two, you know, or you need to go back to an edit to do some trimming and you don't want to be doing it on the raw files. You can then obviously switch back. Now, the other thing as well is, you know, once you've kind of, you know, you've done an edit, how can you actually send somebody your edit? Well, in Resolve 17 now, what you can actually do is you can export a, you can actually go in and export a timeline. So, you know, if you're both working in Resolve, so for example, here's the edit timeline here. I can right click and under timelines, I can say export. And in this option here, we've got something called a DRT. So the DRT is called edit. I can save this to the desktop. And then what I'll do is I'll just create a new project and I'll just call it demo 1. And then what you can do is you can simply import that DRT. And what it will do is it'll import your timeline and all the clips associated with that timeline. And you could do the same in a bin. So that's really good, you know, is if you're working, you know, you've got two people, you're working remotely, one of you might be editing in Resolve, one of you might be grading, you can just send each other timelines. You can just send somebody a DRT and it will, you know, it will just take the timeline. Now, bearing in mind, it is the timeline, it doesn't take the media. To send somebody that, you'd actually have to send them a DRA, and that's not what you really want. So again, in an ideal world, you know, you kind of use Frame.io to share your media, so you both got the same media. and then, you can send each other DRTs, and you don't have to worry too much about, if the DRTs, you've got all the media for the right timeline. If you export a timeline, it exports the timeline and all the media associated with it. So you can also do a DRB, which is a DaVinci Resolve bin. So you could send somebody an entire bin. Now, the other thing you may get is what happens, if you're a colorist and you are working, you're a colorist and you are working in Resolve. So I'm just going to go back to this project. What happens if you're working in Resolve, but you might be, you might be grading in Resolve, but you're working with an editor who is editing in something else. So it might be an Avid, might be Premiere, might be Final Cut. So, if somebody's done an edit, what's the best way of getting it to you? And the answer is, obviously, we can't open Premiere or Avid projects. What we have to do is do it by AAF or XML. So if you do it from Premiere, you export an XML. If you do it from Final Cut, you export an FCP XML. If you do it from an Avid, you export your AAF. So again, but I get a lot of questions about this of people going, well, what's the best way of doing this? And in truth, the best way of doing it is to simply, first of all, import the XML. Now, one of the easiest things to do is, rather than have the XML import media for you, if you've kind of been sharing timelines and you have all the media in Resolve, like I do here, one of the easiest things to do is, if you import an XML, let me just go and find my remote working. So here we are. So here's my XMLs. If I have an XML in here, one of the easiest things to do is, first of all, import it. But it's easier if you have the clips in Resolve to start with. So you uncheck the option automatically import source clips into media pool, because the theory is, if you're sharing timelines and stuff via XML, the likelihood is you've got the media, or if you're working with your editor, get them to send you the media and then drop it into Resolve. And when you say you can uncheck the automatically import source clips into media pool. And then when you hit OK, it'll say, well, what bin do you want to look at for your media? I'm just going to leave it on master. And hey, presto, there we go. We've got a rebuilt timeline. But the other thing you need to do as well, one of the things you really need to do is you need to burn off a reference file. My advice is, from any editor, if you're working in a different editor to Resolve, one of the best things you can do is have an external reference file. So if you're working in Premiere, send them an XML and then just render out a kind of really low res H.264 file. And that's what I'm going to do here. So I have a reference file. So this is, it's a low res reference file. And I'm just going to drag and drop that into my media pool. Now, what I'm then going to do, this clip's in the media pool. What I'm then going to do is, under my viewer, change the option to offline. So now what I can do is drop my reference clip and drop it into here. And what it simply does is it simply shows me a comparison between my edited your reference timeline and your render out of Premiere and what it's looking at in Resolve. So as you can see, what we can now do is I can actually play these side by side, and I can actually start to see the differences. So, these first two clips are not correct because the transform hasn't come across from the editing system. So that's not a problem, because, I can always, this is what you have to do with conforming. This is sometimes why editing in Resolve is quicker. But, you look at this and you kind of go, it's not brought the flips over. So again, I could just go in and quickly rectify that in my timeline by using the flip option in the inspector. But then, I can sort of start to scroll through until I get to the rear of the car. And you can see on this, there's been a resize done. So on the reference file, what was done in Premiere, there was a resize done on this shot, and it's not come across into Resolve. So, what we have to do is go and sort of resize this. And there are tools to help you with this, because again, if I right click on the timeline monitor, I've got a whole load of comparison options. And one of the things I like for resize is the difference. So now you can see with the difference, it's showing me kind of this overlay of the two shots. So again, to get this shot correct, I kind of realized that what I actually need to do is I need to kind of scale the shot up a little bit and sort of resize it so it matches. Maybe need to go a little bit further. And there we go. And basically when the screen basically goes almost black, there we go, that'll do. You can now see we've got a transform in there. So again, if you're working remotely, you're sharing edits between different pieces of software, you can do things like importing an XML. And then I said, but this is what conforming entails. Some things don't translate across. Other problem we've got is, well, what happens when that happens? What do you do when that happens? The final clip of this sequence is incorrect. So what it may be the fact of one of the first things that Resolve does when it looks at rebuilding an XML is the time code, because that's the critical thing. That's what you're editing in your sequence in your chosen editor has a time code, and this is what Resolve is looking at. So what happens if you have something like this where there's clearly a file mismatch? This is what was rendered out of our editing system. This is what Resolve has rebuilt. So again, what you can actually do under your clip options, you've got something called Conform Lock Enable. So if you just uncheck that, as soon as I uncheck that, you can see with this final clip that I've selected that you get this little red warning. And what Resolve is now saying is going, I'm not quite sure this is the right clip, because potentially what I've got is a clip with two different time codes. So if you basically double click on the red icon, it gives you what's called a conflict resolution. And as you can see, the problem with this, the time codes are almost exactly the same. The name of the clips is different, but the time codes you can see are overlapping, because this one starts at, all right, it's 1402.12, and this was 1402.13, but they're too close together for Resolve to understand. So Resolve is now going, okay, there's a bit of a file mismatch in here, but you can always change it. And then there we go. And then once you've done that, you can turn on what we can call your Conform Lock Enable again, and it'll just lock the clip back up. So this is what we call conforming. This is, is you can conform from other editing systems, but you do just have to make sure that you can actually, everything comes across correctly. And this is why, people always say is, well, Resolve was always a color correction tool. Why did you introduce an editor into it? The reason we introduced an editor into it was simply the reason that conforming took a long time, and conforming was a pain. And I'll hold my hands up. I got fired from a job for doing a conform wrong. It was years ago. It was on a Smoke system. And what I did for the conform, we taken it from an Avid system into Smoke. And what I was doing is I was stepping through the first frame of every single shot. It was a documentary. It was an hour long. I was stepping through the first frame of every single shot, went, oh, everything matches. Well, I didn't realize half the clips in the sequence had a speed change. So even though the first frame matched, the last frame didn't. And I just caused a whole mess. But again, you do have that opportunity. So if you're a colorist working with an editor, you're both working remotely, you can send XMLs and AAFs and conform. The other thing as well is, you may start to grade with this, and then your editor may go, I've made some changes. So what you can actually do is, your editor again comes back and goes, I've made some changes. I've sent you another XML. So again, what would happen is you'd import the other XML. So they've kind of gone, oh, I've done a re-edit. And again, I'm not going to automatically import source clips into the media pool because we've already got them. And there we go. We have the re-edit. Now, what you can actually do is you can use the new timeline to compare with the one that you had before. So for example, if you've started grading already and you know that the changes have happened further down the timeline, what you could actually do is said, this was the XML that we originally imported, and this is our new re-edit one. But what I could do is right click, and there's an option that says compare with current timeline. So what this now does is it opens up the timeline compare tool. And as you can see, basically what's happened, the new timeline, the re-edit timeline that our editors just sent us, has an extra clip in it. But, say if you started working down here, all you can do is right click, say accept change, and then hit close, and it'll drop the extra clip into your timeline. So again, that's another really useful tool. If you started making, or, you might be doing a documentary that's really long, so you might be two of you working on it, or you might be lucky enough to have an assistant and they've done an assemble edit and they keep making changes. If you kind of use the timeline compare tool, if they've dropped extra clips in, you can just use the timeline compare. So if you've been kind of fine tuning and working the start of the timeline and they're carrying on editing at the end, you can just carry on accepting the changes. So the work that you're doing doesn't sort of, you don't have to kind of copy and paste that into a different timeline. The other thing as well is, and this is, I suppose, where Frame.io again comes in, because it's kind of got a double usage. Because what you can do is you can render out a timeline to your account. So this is what I've done with the edit timeline. Again, I'll show you how I did that. It's in the Frame.io options. So as you can see in the Frame.io options, you can browse where to upload it to, you add it to the render queue, and it renders out. And admittedly, this is one I made earlier. So what this means is, if you want to send it to a client who wants to preview, they simply have to sign in to Frame.io, sign into your Frame.io account, and they can preview your edit. So again, they can double click. So this is the timeline that I uploaded. So again, so what they can do is they can actually play through, and then they can leave a comment. So I could say, check sharpness. If I can spell, check sharpness here. So I can add that. So I've got one in there, and then I could say, add another comment here. Not sure about this shot, for example, and send that. And as you can see, it's bringing up these comments. Now what you can actually do is, if I now go back to the same timeline, you can see I've got markers that have appeared. These markers are Frame.io markers. So what you can actually do is you can upload a timeline just as a .mov file, for example, and you want to send it to a client. They can make some comments and just go, I'm not sure, make some comments, hit send, and then they appear as markers in the timeline. And as you can see, not sure about this shot. So the notes that they have made appear in Resolve. And that's kind of almost, it's not really a double-edged sword, but that's kind of the dual use of, that's sort of the dual use of Frame.io, is not only can you share media, but you can actually share timelines with clients or each other just as files, and you can leave comments for each other and they'll actually appear in Resolve, as long as obviously you're signed into your Frame.io account. So what about, what about grading projects as well? Just some of the techniques that if you're working remotely with other people, what about sort of grading projects? Now, what you could do is, if you don't want to conform, so if you don't want to have to go through the whole XML thing, you don't have to, you don't want to go through the XML thing, you don't want to have to conform, you just kind of want one easy way of working. There is an easy way of working, because what you could do is get kind of a really high quality, you could get sort of a render. I put high quality, it's an H.264, but what you could get is you could get just get your editor, for example, if you're going to grade, you could get your editor to simply render out a flattened file. And then what I could do is, just import that file into Resolve. And there it is, as you can see. So this is, as you can see, it's a finished edit. And what I would do is I would say, create new timeline using a selected clip. So there we go. So as you can see, it's our file. So this is the easiest way if if you've been working with somebody who's editing and they're sending material to you to grade with. If you don't want to spend, if it's a long project, what you could do is say, get them to send you a flattened QuickTime movie. And then under the timeline options, you can say detect scene cuts. And what it'll do is it will go away and it will analyze the clip, and it will automatically cut the clip up into different clips. So what it simply does, this uses the neural engine in Resolve, and it's very clever. When it detects a change in a frame, significant luminance changes, it selects a different scene. Now, the tricky thing with this is if you've got things like transitions on, it can be a little bit more tricky to do, because obviously if you've got a dissolve, it can be a little bit more tricky. What I would say is when you do have dissolves, you maybe treat those two clips as one, and then you kind of put one splice in your you put one splice in, for here, for example, at the end, I've got a fade out. What I could say is, well, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to splice that and grade the two clips separately. So scene cut is really, really easy, because now what happens, I go into the color page, each one of these shots shows up as a separate clip, which is great. But then, as I said, when you've got transitions, it becomes a lot harder. So it's really quick and easy to do. However, there are certain things that you may have to work around. The other thing you could do as well is, rather than Resolve to automate that process for you, what you could do is you could splice the media up before you even start. And rather than it doing automatically, if you get your editors to send you an EDL, an edit decision list, as well as a flattened QuickTime file. Do I have that? I thought I had, sorry guys, just bear with me a second. I thought I had my EDL in here, but okay, not to worry. I can, I'll show you how to do that. So, for example, if you were, editing in a different editing system, one of the easiest things you could do is you could quite simply on your timeline, I could right click and I could say export an EDL. So again, I know I'm doing this from Resolve, but you can do this from any other editing systems. Most editing systems support an edit decision list. So what you can do is you get your editor to send you a flattened off QuickTime file plus an edit decision list. Before you import the clip into Resolve, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create a new bin called Scene Cut, because what it'll do is it'll drop all the clips in. So what I could do is right click in this clip. And as you can see, I can open up, before I import it into the actual media pool, I can say, do a scene cut detection. And I could choose auto scene detect, but it's going to do the same thing that I did in Resolve. However, what I can do is I can say, well, load in an EDL and then go and find the EDL that I created. And it'll automatically put the cuts in for me, because the EDL looks at the edit points, and then I say add cuts to media pool, and it splices the clip up into separate clips already. So you can create an EDL. So again, your editor can do that. The other thing I get asked a lot as well is sort of going, well, you know, what happens if you start grading and then somebody goes, I've got another timeline. So for example, if I go into, I'm looking at the, oopsie, let's move that out of the way. I've got the completed grade timeline. So remember, this is basically the material that has a lot of grades on it. So imagine, you know, you get to a point where this is your project, you've done a promo for Aston Martin, you've done all these kind of weird and wonderful looks for them, and then somebody turns around and goes, we've changed the edit, the client's changed their mind, and really what they want to do is they want to swap some clips around. And you are sort of going, okay, but I finished the grade. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to open up the XML timeline. So I'm just going to open up the XML timeline. So again, your editor sends you a new timeline without any grades on. So they send you the XML, but the XML won't have the grades on. So what you can do is you can use something called color trace. So what we can actually do here is, if I go into the media pool and I go into the timelines and I have the XML reconnect from timeline option, that's the timeline I'm looking at now. If I right click under timelines, I have an option called color trace, and it says, and Resolve says color trace from timeline. So it says, well, okay, what timeline do you want to trace from? And as you can see, the color trace setup, you can color trace from different projects. It doesn't have to be in the same project. So for example, I'm in the Aston Martin remote working, and what I wanted to do is I'm looking at, was it the completed grade I was looking at? Yeah, so I can say, look at the completed grade timeline, and I can hit continue. And as you can now see, there's shots that are green. So the shots that are green are an exact match. The shots that are blue, there's a match, but there might be an alternative shot for it. The ones that turn up orange are the ones that don't have a grade on. So basically what you've done is, you know, you want to copy all the grades that you've done from one timeline into this new timeline. But what Resolve is saying is the one with the orange box round won't have a grade on it. So if we say copy grade and exit, it'll copy all the grades over apart from shot 17, and you'll have to do a grade on that. So that's another cool way of working, because again, you understand, you know, you start to get to understand that even though, you know, and this, again, this has happened more and more with remote working, and, you know, some really big post houses are working remotely. I speak to the guys at Company 3, and they are working remotely at the moment, and they have to share grades all the time. So you might have a colorist assistant who just does kind of a base balancing, or they might just kind of do an ARRI lookup table on input, for example. But then what will happen is they'll send that timeline to the colorist, who may have already started grading, and then they kind of go, okay, I've made these changes, and they can just use the color trace. So color trace is used massively throughout the industry. And again, it's been really pushed with remote grading. With remote working, because people, you're not sat in the same room. So the client makes a change and goes, right, I need all these new clips in, and using color trace is a really fast way of copying and pasting grades. If you have a timeline, it's really easy to find on my timeline because I've only got like 19 clips in it. But for example, if you had a timeline with 1,000 clips in, say, if you do a color trace, what you don't want to be wanting to do is to actually go through and try and find all the clips that aren't graded. But again, this is where your light box comes in and resolves, because what you can do is just jump into the light box. And in the light box, you could just say, just show me all the ungraded clips. You can also do this from the clip filters now. So under clips, if you click the down arrow on the clip button, you can say, just show me all the ungraded clips. And then you can go and grade them and then say, well, show me all clips again. So again, there's mechanisms. So you don't, if you've got a really long timeline, you don't have to be searching through absolutely everything to find your ungraded clips. So they're just some of the techniques that said over the past year, I've been helping people with a lot. The working on lower resolutions. The great thing is Resolve isn't like other editing systems where you're stuck to a timeline resolution. Because again, I think Premiere, I think Final Cut, I think Avid, they're all great editors in their own way. But one of the things with all those editing systems is once you've chosen a timeline resolution, if you then change that timeline resolution, everything kind of needs re-rendering. Whereas in Resolve, you can just toggle the timeline resolution. So, and we've had this with our 12K camera, people going, I want to work in 12K. And you go, why? Because you're not going to preview in 12K. So, these are some of the workarounds. Think about your timeline resolution. Think about the proxy playback mode. Think about optimizing your media. If you have lots of red 8K files, you don't want to be editing with those because it just puts a strain on your machine. So create optimized media files, or now create proxy media files. So you can have a folder of raw media and a folder of proxy media, and you can edit between one and then throw it away and re-import the other, and then reconnect the proxy files. So if you do need to kind of do a quick edit, you can use proxy files instead of raws. And then, sending people timelines. You can set, if you're both working in Resolve, you can send them a Resolve timeline. If you're working in a different editing system, you can send an XML or an AAF. You can compare the differences. You can compare timelines. If you started grading, you can use color trace and trace the grades from one timeline to another. The final thing I just want to sort of jump into, I'm just going to jump back into Keynote. Just hide Resolve a second and jump back into my Keynote. There we go. Always the other thing to bear in mind is additional hardware. So again, this is cropping up quite a lot because again, people are now starting to use like domestic TVs and just other computer displays as a clean video feed. So Resolve Studio, you can just have a second display running from a graphics card. So you can have a full screen, clean video feed from the graphics card. But for me, what I always want is something that is a little bit more not controllable, that's the wrong word, but something that's a true video feed into a monitor. So not something coming out a graphics card. So we do Ultra Studio and DeckLink devices. And again, you can get an Ultra Studio device that outputs HD for about 140 quid. Same goes with a deck link card. So these things aren't crazy. Obviously, the more you need your capture and playback device to do, the more expensive the card gets. So, if you just want to output 1080, if you're in the Ultra Studio range, we've got an Ultra Studio mini monitor. For the deck link range, we've got a deck link mini monitor. If you want to monitor Ultra HD, the deck link mini monitor 4K is great. With the Ultra Studio, unfortunately, there's a little bit of a price hike, but we do something called the Ultra Studio 4K mini, which is sort of an entry level one. But the 4K mini is great as well because it will do, DCI 4K at 60 frames a second. For those of you that really want to output 8K, there's just the DeckLink 8K Pro. But again, we've had lots of questions about these, is to go, what should I get if I want to use like my TV as an external monitor, a DeckLink card or an Ultra Studio? And again, you can then choose it depending on the resolution you want to output. Again, if you want to sort of, one of the questions that sort of people have around HDR. So HDR is becoming more popular. You really, again, with HDR, you can obviously use a domestic TV for an HDR output, but there's only 4 devices that support proper HDR output, whether that be a SDI or HDMI, and the Ultra Studio 4K Mini and the Ultra Studio 4K Extreme 3, and the DeckLink 4K Extreme 12G and 8K Pro. Because again, a lot of people are getting into HDR, and yeah, you can use a domestic HDR TV for your HDR mastering. And for HDR, you have to have a DeckLink device. So it understands because again, your display in resolve isn't HDR. So to monitor proper HDR, you've got to have a proper output device. And these are the only 4 that will support an HDR workflow. Again, people then sort of go into, well, what would you recommend as a monitor? And again, this is what I would try and recommend. And again, it always depends on your budget. There's nothing wrong with using a domestic TV. At least it gives you an idea of what the picture looks like on a display that's not a computer display. But people always say, well, what grading monitor would you recommend? And as a manufacturer, we don't recommend grading monitors. Resolve will basically work with anything you plug into it. As a monitor goes, anything that you plug into an Ultra Studio or a DeckLink, it'll show the image on. If you were looking at buying a monitor, get something that at least covers the 100% of the Rec. 709 color space, which a lot of them do now. Ideally, you want a monitor that covers the DCI color space. So P3 color space is kind of what we use for cinema. Also, HDR, Dolby Vision HDR is delivered in P3 D65. A lot of monitors coming onto the market cover some of the P3 gamut. What I would try and get a monitor that's 10-bit, has got 10-bit color depth rather than an 8-bit. For future proofing, I would look at Ultra HD or 4K. They can always downscale to HD. So again, if you are buying a monitor now, again, it's really, funnily enough, it's really hard to buy an HD monitor now. They're all Ultra HD monitors. If you are looking at HDR monitors, they need HDMI. I think a lot of them do, but for HDR, you need HDMI 2.0 as a connection. OLED TVs can be used for grading HDR, and for true HDR grading, a monitor needs 100,000:1 contrast ratio. So again, it's with monitors, it's sort of what you're doing. If you're going into the HDR world, there's a range of monitors now that, I don't know if you guys, I did something for Scan about the Asus ProArt monitor, which is great. And it's like a £2,000 monitor, and that does HDR really well. That's a 10-bit monitor. It covers 99% of the DCI color space. So again, if you're looking for affordable monitors, that's the one. Again, if if that's beyond you, things like BenQ, HP have done them before. I don't know if you can get the HP. I used to use an HP Color Edge that was quite good, and that was about 700-800 quid. So again, yeah, with your grading monitors, even if it's just a domestic TV, I always recommend have a video output, so you get an idea of what it looks like as a video feed rather than something on a GUI display. We've obviously got the two panels as well. That, again, working remotely, a lot of people have been looking into these. Again, it depends on your budget and what you're wanting to do. The micro panel does all your sort of primary color correction tools. But, if you want to go into your secondaries, where things like power windows and curves and qualifiers, then you'd need the mini panel. But again, it depends on what you're doing. The other thing to maybe bear in mind that again is that people have been doing. So, people have been looking at kind of viewing live resolve feeds. So actually what you can do is, you can hook up a web presenter. So what you could do is you could run a feed out of Resolve of your Decklink card and run it into a web presenter, and it turns basically your Decklink card into a camera. So you could sort of stream that to somebody. People are using Hyperdeck Minis for customer playout. These are, again, basically, but what we're trying to say is there's sort of glue that goes around Resolve. So if you are working remotely and you need to stream a live feed to somebody, or you need to kind of maybe capture a feed from somebody, we've got a Hyperdeck Mini. So we've got a lot of glue that sits around the sort of working remotely. This just gives you an idea. So for example, if you wanted to do a sort of live stream, so in your little studio, you've got a grading monitor that for your grade, you might have a domestic TV on the wall just to see what it looks like on a domestic TV, but then you've got a client sitting in another country. What you could do is you could have an Ultra Studio 4K Mini that is that, run your HDMI into your grading monitor, then you run an SDI out into your domestic TV display. But again, because the Ultra Studio 4K Mini's only got one HDMI out, so what you might have to do is convert an SDI to an HDMI, which you can do obviously with one of our converters, and then you could run an SDI into the web presenter and then do a live stream for a client preview. So again, that just gives you an idea of sort of what is possible. I mean, the one thing I would say is, the color over a web presenter, obviously you're compressing the color, so it's never ideal, but it'll give you an idea. So hopefully that's just given you sort of a little insight, not so much as to, the very fancy, we've got things like remote grading and shared workflows, but rather than us sort of going to complex networking and VPNs and everything else, hopefully what I've done today is kind of showed you, said if you've been forced to work on a laptop, or, you don't have a machine that can sort of power 8K images, there are workarounds to it. And also if you're working in conjunction with other people, you can share content, you can share comments, you can share timelines, and I said, and you can add the changes in wherever you see fit. Wow. That was kind of intense, Al. I've been going quite a while there. I didn't realize the time.
Not a problem at all, Si. It's been absolutely great to learn all about it. Really appreciate your time. So I know we've had a few people sort of jump on and off as things have gone on. And now we're sort of at the end of it. We'll do a bit of a Q&A around it. The first question we got actually was it was a message sent to me. Someone had to sort of jump on and jump off, and they asked whether or not it would be recorded. So yes, this is being recorded, and we are going to put this up across socials and on our YouTube channels later on as soon as we can, really, once we've got it nicely sort of edited and available. Outside of that, we had another question, and I think you covered it quite well, but I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add. So one of the questions that came in was, do I need DaVinci? Do I need an Ultra Studio for correctly viewing an image from my MacBook Pro to my monitor? And in terms of color accuracy and color critical workflows, I think that's always the best recommended practice, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I noticed with my Macs that I've got MacBook Pro here, and the Mac displays, they kind of have auto dimming on that you can turn off. But yeah, I always recommend to people, as you say, something like the Ultra Studio 3Gs. Yeah, is great because you can plug it into your monitor, and as Alistair said, it's just more accurate because it's a proper clean video feed. It's not something you're looking at on your computer display on a GUI. And as you say, these Mac displays, they do kind of have auto dimming on. And I've noticed with mine, I don't know if it's just my machine, the temperature tends to change slightly. If the lighting changes in the room, it kind of does an auto dimming, and sometimes it can be warm, and then sometimes it can be a little bit cold. And you know, GUI displays as well they show blue, as you know, is you know, because you can get glasses if you use monitors all the time. You can get glasses that filter the blue out of displays. So computer monitors, yeah, you can kind of calibrate them, but it's far better to have something like an Ultra Studio, and then you've got a clean video feed output, and you're not going to get some of the weird stuff you get with GUI interfaces.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's it really. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to sort of throw them in chat. We'll give it 30 seconds or so. But again, I just wanted to sort of take this opportunity to thank you, Simon, thank Blackmagic Design, and thank you to everyone else that has that's jumped on today. I hope this has been helpful, and we'll try as a DaVinci Resolve Advanced reseller to bring you as much of this type of content as we can. So if you want to see more of this from us, then let us know, and we'll do our best to work with Blackmagic to get this out. We have had, just as I say that, there has been another question. Are there any limitations to using the free version of Resolve versus using the studio version of Resolve when working remotely?
No, I mean, obviously there are differences. I mean, one of the things they're saying is you can obviously now, the free version, you can actually use an SQL database. So you can actually share projects sort of, if you're in the same environment, so you're in the same room or you're in the same building and you kind of network together, the free version will do that. But also, yeah, working remotely, this is one of the things that you can do that's really good. Obviously, the limitations of the free version are the fact that, there are filters missing, there's no noise reduction, things like there's only certain neural engine things you can do in the free version. So a lot of things like the new Magic Mask and the Speed Warp, they're all just in the studio version. But one of the things you can do is, if you want, you can work, if, for example, you have a free version and somebody's had the studio version, they can send you a studio project and it will open in the free version. It will just watermark things like filters. And certain things, if you had to use the Magic Mask, it just wouldn't be on there. So no, there's no real limitations because, funnily enough, the free version can open a studio project and vice versa. So again, you don't even have to buy the software. If you're just going to, maybe edit something for somebody, you could do the edit, send them the free project, and they open it in studio to do all the grading. So yeah, when it comes to remote working per se, a lot of the techniques I've shown you there are available in the free version.
Yeah, and I think with version 17, was it the collaboration tool set? So having the ability to have multiple people work on the same project was actually brought to the free version as well. So yeah, if anything, there's even more functionality now in the free version for working remotely than there has been in the past, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always said anyway, there's what, 95% of the features that are available in the studio version are available in the free version.
Yeah, it's about that. It is about that.
Yeah. It's incredibly powerful. Anyway, don't want to take up any more of your time, Simon. I've really appreciated, having you come on to do this. And again, thank you to everyone who's logged on for this. We really appreciate it. And we'll have these recordings out soon. Hope you all stay safe and have a good weekend.
For more information on any of the products and solutions mentioned in this webinar, contact the Pro Video team today. And you can also shop our Blackmagic design range at Scan Pro Video. If you haven't checked out our other sessions yet, then head over to the Pro Video YouTube channel and search Blackmagic Design Webinars. Thanks for watching.